In the prior video we set up an SQL trace and now we need to test it. So what I want to do is have basically a clone of this orchestration so that I can distribute two examples to you. One that uses the debug technique we discussed earlier, which was the systemdiagnostics.debug.write line, or we want to have another orchestration that instead uses the SQL trace. So I just want to do a copy and then a paste of this orchestration. Now, when you end up with a copy like this, you can rename it, but unfortunately inside that orchestration there are some things you might have to change manually. So I'm going to call this debug SQL. And then what I want to do is go to the disk and actually open this orchestration here with just a text editor. And if you've never seen what the inside of the ODX file is, it's actually a text file. It has a big chunk of XML in there, but it's not entirely XML. So the XML begins here, and if you look for the word meta model, you'll see where the XML ends. And then you have another pound sign. Then you end up with this C# type language that is basically Xlang. And from there to the end of the file. And you can actually see your code statements here that you've coded in your program inside the BizTalk expression. Okay, so now what we need to do is change a lot of the references. So we do find the word debug technique. You see that was the name of the old orchestration. And what I did is also, just to make it a little easier, I renamed the project so we didn't have the orchestration and the project be exactly the same. So anytime I see the word PROJ, I don't want to change it. So I'm actually going to go to search and replace here and change debug technique to debug SQL. But I don't want to change the word debug technique proj. So I found, and I want to replace that one. Here's a port name. And so yes, we think we want to change that. You can actually share port types between orchestrations, but that's not what we want to do here. So we want to replace. Now here is the schema. So our schema is actually in the project. So I think that's going to have to actually be PROJ. Okay, there's the schema name. Find again. Orc debug technique. We definitely want to replace that. There's that schema again. So I'm going to put PROJ there. Oh, actually I don't think we put the PROJ because of the type name. Here I want to replace that. No, I don't want to replace that. Yes, change that. This name, yes. This name is the file name on disk, so we'll replace it. Module is the name of the orchestration, yes. Port type, yes. Schema name, no, we don't want to change that. Yes, change that. Disk, yes. Sometimes I do replace alls, but because of the weird way I named this, it's actually a little trickier than normal. So replace there. Schema, no, we don't want to replace the schema. That I believe we do. So now we're at the end of the file, back to the top. Let's just give this a try and see if I have any compile errors. So I'm going to save it, go back to Visual Studio and open it, and then do a build on that project. And you see I did get a couple little errors where I must have gotten sloppy. You can also see up here how we messed our port up basically. So our port is defined over here in port types. And I think we can easily fix that here. Like right here, we could just reconnect that port. Again, this can be very tricky if you try to clone a very large orchestration. There, so that fixed that. And now we have 0 errors. So that was the only problem. Ports can be a little tricky when you clone. So now what we want to do is actually replace our debug statements from before right here. So actually we never did the write log. And so here we want to substitute with our function class. So actually first I have here a project. I have no reference to my functions. So in the past, we've always made our references by going to the same project, or actually other projects in the solution. Just to be different this time, I'm going to add the reference straight to a disk file. So instead of picking a project in the solution, we're actually going to go pick the DLL directly from the disk. So here's the cross-reference screen, and again, instead of using projects, we're going to go to Browse, and then we're going to find on the disk our function library. So it's going to be under Projects. I think it's BizTalk Intro, Function Library. Then go to the bin debug, and there it is. So we'll add that, and then slightly off the screen here I hit OK. So now we have a reference to it. I should be able to say biztalk.training.com.function-library dot, and then the name of my method is right here, debug write SQL trace. Now let's see what parameters we have. So just so this shows up on the screen, you can actually split it on two different lines like that. And now you can see most of the parameters. So the first thing is the source. So my orchestration name is debug SQL. If you want to be more specific, you could say like orc debug SQL. And now to get the rest of the parameters, unfortunately once you put the comma there you kind of lose your IntelliSense. So quickly we're just going to go back and see what follows that is the source, the stream, the GUID of the orchestration, our message, and our user key. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parameters. So the first one is that the source. Then we have our stream ID, which right now I'm just going to call it stream ID. In the real world, you would need to go figure out what your stream ID is going to be. Well, actually, let's don't just totally make it up. So let's put here message in. That's our promoted fields. But if we go here to BTS, we can use the message ID. Now if you're calling another orchestration, then you would pass the stream ID everywhere you go. Every web service you call, everywhere you would call that. And then here we want to get the orchestration instance ID. So I'm going to actually put that in another variable and call it process ID. And then we have our message that we want to debug, which is right here. And then we have our user key, which was like the PO number or something like that. So here I could say message in dot last name. That could be my user key. Okay, so we still have one field undefined here, and that's the process ID. So we're going to go add a variable. It'll be a string variable, so we select type is string here. And I'll put that in a separate shape here. So we have string process ID equals. So this video we're just doing several things differently. In prior videos we showed another way to get the process ID, and this is actually sort of the preferred way, but there's actually a Microsoft bug, and I'm kind of curious to see if it'll happen where I can show it to you. Sometimes when you have this process ID here like this, it just will almost randomly put a little red flag here, and it'll tell you your code is invalid. And if you come look at your code, it's fine. And then sometimes if you just like hit a space there and then save it, it will actually compile then. And then it might be a week later you open it and then it'll say that it doesn't like the code again. So here we're going to call it get process ID, which is the instance of the orchestration. That may not be the best term for it, but so here now we're going to have the process ID. And now what we would do is more or less copy this trace statement everywhere else. So like right here in debug 3. Now notice I'm using the debug 3 as kind of my own little convention. What you might actually want to do is put that as a separate variable called debug location, and you might want to put debug 3 here as a separate parameter. That's basically up to you the way you design your SQL database, because again this is a custom solution that if you implement this, you're responsible for your own tracing. Okay, so there's that, and then we will also put it at the last of the orchestration. And all we need here is debug 99, the end. I want to verify this again. Debug 3, okay. And I guess to be totally complete, we need to put that in debug 2 as well here. Okay, so this is the My Name is Neil branch. So now I'm going to deploy this. I've renamed the project, remember. One thing I want to do, I want to put it in a separate application, which I did not do last time. So here, application is going to be called Debug Techniques. And I deploy that, and it's a fairly fast deploy because it's a very small schema and a very small orchestration. And there's an error there because I think I have a port maybe left over from last time I deployed it. So I'm going to go back here to BizTalk app 1. I undeployed manually, I think, yes, the prior version of this. However, the receive port is still there. So I'm going to delete, well, I can't delete the port until I get rid of the location, right? So I have to disable and then delete the receive location. Okay, it said primary receive location cannot be deleted. So if you only have one receive location, then you do actually delete the port and the receive location will go away. So now we should be able to redeploy. That's basically what this error means. When you see unable to deploy early bindings, it often has to do with a port that was already deployed under a similar name. And notice it does say here already exists, specify unique receive port name. So we'll do the deploy again. And you can see very quickly that time it did succeed. So now we're ready to test. And one more question here is which orchestration is going to run when I drop the message? I guess they're both going to run. I could have done a little trick, and for instance I could have used a filter in my initializing receive here, my activating receive. We could have had a filter so that my message could go to one orchestration or the other. But the way I've got it set right now, actually both orchestrations will run. If you want to test this on your machine and you don't want one of the orchestrations to run, another fast way is just here, come and say don't compile one of them, and that way it won't get deployed either. And remember that I told you about that funny error that crops up? See, we actually compiled and deployed, everything works fine, and now look at this. You got this little red symbol here. It says the expression you have entered is not valid. Click to edit it. So we're going to click it, and you can see there's no red squigglies or anything. If I hit OK, the error doesn't go away. But watch this. If I just add or delete one little space in there, then the error goes away. So that's a bug you need to know about, and it has to do with using this syntax, Microsoft Xlang Core Service with Service Instance ID, which gives you the current instance ID, a GUID, Global Unique ID, for your current orchestration when it's running at runtime. Okay, so now I need to restart my host, and then I'll drop my file. Oh, actually, I come to think of it, it's not going to run both orchestrations because we actually set up two drop directories, I think. Yes. So here we have debug technique. I think I need to add one now called debug SQL. And just to confirm that, let's go back and look at my receive locations. Under, not this application, we need to refresh the debug technique application here. I hope I didn't hit delete. So receive locations, they're disabled, but look at them here. If I stretch this out, you can see we have two totally different directories. So if I drop the file in the SQL in directory, it should run the SQL demo, otherwise the debug technique demo. So I can highlight both of these and then enable the receive ports. I need to check my orchestrations. I need to set my bindings on them. So we'll bind, and then the ports are already set up because we were using a specify now. Properties, Bindings, and pick the host. And now I can highlight both of those and start them both at the same time. So now just to check the receive location again, I need a directory called debug SQL, and under that I need a directory called in. Then here's my sample file on the right side, and I simply highlight and copy it. BizTalk hopefully will read that. Okay, the reason it's not reading it, I came back over here, I refreshed, and you can see that this port got disabled for some reason. I think what happened was the port didn't exist when I first tried to enable this, and so it automatically disabled itself, and we can actually confirm that by going to the event log, and you'll see here it says the receive location so and so is shutting down. It doesn't really say why. If I go back, it says the adapter cannot access this folder, and it says verify the folder exists. So that folder or directory did not exist at the moment that I tried to enable it here. So now I'm going to enable it again and just hit refresh here, make sure it still stays enabled, and then we're going to go back, and you see the file has been picked up by BizTalk, so we're going to go to hat and we're going to refresh, and you can see which orchestration actually ran now. So actually I need to run it again. We're at 113 right now. So the receive happened at 113 and the SQL orchestration completed. No errors. So it looks like if something runs the first time, I consider that actually kind of lucky. And now we want to go to SQL and look at it. So we're going to go to the SQL tool here. And this is the table, and if we hit the exclamation point, it'll refresh the table, and we don't have anything here. Now we will actually go debug this in the next video.